and how it's made dream cars. The GT40, an icon of race car history, rides again. The American car maker Superformance builds GT40s at their high-tech automotive factory in Port Elizabeth, South Africa. The vehicle they build is considered a real GT40 because it is a continuation of the original celebrated champion car. The story behind the GT40 is a fixture of automotive lore. Prior to the 1960s, European cars dominated the world of long-distance car racing. No American manufacturer had ever won the 24-hour Le Mans race. Henry Ford II was fed up. He desperately wanted to win the Le Mans. In 1963, Italian race car driver Enzo Ferrari considered selling his company to Ford. But when it became clear that Ferrari wanted to hold on to his race cars and only sell his road vehicles, Ford decided to turn down Ferrari's offer. Instead, he made a deal with the British race car manufacturer Lola to develop their mid-engine Mark VI into a Ferrari-dominating champion. Ford assembled a team of designers in England, where they went to work creating the most advanced race car of its time. From 1966 to 1969, GT40s won 4 consecutive Le Mans victories. One particular car, the GT40 MK1 number 1075, became the first and only individual car to win back-to-back victories in 1968 and 1969. The original designs for the GT40 were handcrafted technical drawings. Superformance has scanned them into a CAD software program. They follow the design of the original so closely that their cars are considered a continuation series, meaning they are virtually identical to the original GT40s in design, construction, and materials. Here, workers TIG weld and spot weld together an all-steel monocoque chassis. The GT40 was one of the first road vehicles to feature a steel monocoque. The Superformance GT40 chassis even includes the original double-layered steel roof with cutaways for the doors, a particularly difficult element to build. The 2 fuel tanks run along the sides of the car in reinforced cavities. True to the original GT40, Superformance builds the rest of the car body out of fiberglass composites. They hand-layer sheets of fiberglass and resin into the appropriate molds. Then cure them in an oven for 8 hours at 176 degrees. The technicians work on the front section of the car by simply unlatching and lifting it off. The designers of the GT40 included these features to give mechanics quick and complete access to the inner workings of the car when it makes pit stops during a race. 2 technicians spend an entire week working on a single car body. They add cream-colored filler and reduce the gray composite to smooth out the surface and ensure the fit and finish are flawless. Next, workers mount the body panels on the chassis and bring the assembly to the paint department. Technicians start by spraying the areas that will be the color of the stripe. Then, a worker uses specialized tape to mask the areas where stripes will be. The stripes must line up perfectly from the back to the front of the car. While a customer can choose any color or pattern of stripes, many opt for the original Le Mans racing stripes, which are used to quickly and easily identify a race car. Another important detail is the car's racing number. To make sure it's clearly visible, competitors have their number painted inside a large white circle. In many countries, this is called a roundel, but in the US, it's known as a gumball. Now that the round template is placed in the appropriate spot, he uses more tape to mask the circumference of the gumball. Next, he uses a wider, less flexible tape to further mask out the areas surrounding the template. He uses a small handheld razor for cutting the tape to speed up the process. This second layer of tape makes it harder for the paint to bleed through. The gumball can now be painted white. Once everything has been masked, a painter goes to work with a spray gun. All of the body parts have been carefully positioned in the same orientation they will have to the ground once assembled. This is because gravity exerts a small but visible effect during the drying process. Correct positioning of the parts ensures uniform drying. After waiting 25 minutes to give the paint time to dry, a worker begins slowly and carefully removing the masking tape. Perfectly formed racing stripes emerge. Peeling the masking system off the gumball requires almost the same amount of care and precision as applying it in the first place. Underneath is a flawless circle ready for its racing number. Some owners might choose to have the number 6 painted on, since this was the number sported by the famous GT40 that won the 24-hour Le Mans race twice in a row. Among the many features that immediately identify a GT40 are the seats with their low-slung position and distinctive breather holes. Combining comfort and utility, these are the seats of a working race car. A specialist begins the upholstery process by quilting a section of seat cover material onto a backing foam. The seat cover material is known as Alcantara. This is a trademark product that imitates the look and feel of suede leather. It's so convincing that people often mistake it for the real thing. Manufacturers produce Alcantara from a combination of polyester and polyurethane, which they put through a high-tech spinning process to create a fiber with extremely low mass. They further process the fiber with a complex textile operation. This includes needle punching, buffing, impregnation, extraction, finishing, and dyeing. The result is a comfortable, stain-resistant, and highly durable material. Exactly what you need when you're racing around the roads of Le Mans for 24 hours in hot June weather. The original GT40 had no air conditioning, so the drivers must have been sweating buckets during their stints at the wheel. Those breather holes were there to allow for some air circulation. This section of seat cover material is ready for the next phase. Because breather holes are pierced through both the material and the backing foam, they need reinforcement. The reinforcement is called a seat grommet or eyelet. A worker eases one section through the hole, then fits a backing piece over it. A hand-operated press folds the metal in a way that firmly grips both sides of the fabric. The finished eyelets add to the vintage look of the seat material. They once had a functional purpose. Now they're just there for looks. Unlike the original, the new Superformance GT40s are fully air-conditioned. A craftsman begins gluing the seat cover material onto the foam cushioning. Foam is one of the few contemporary features that Superformance has added. The original GT40s had woven elasticated webbing under the seat covers for comfort. The tension of the webbing could be individually adjusted for the weight of a particular driver. Race car drivers, like horse jockeys, tended to be small and lightweight. Good thing, too, because the GT40 didn't have much room to spare. In fact, that's why it's called a GT40. GT stands for Grand Touring, while the 40 is there because the car is just over 3 feet tall at 40 inches. That's very low to the ground. For a tall driver, the cockpit can feel a bit cramped. Legendary race car driver Dan Gurney was 6'4". To help him squeeze into the GT40, a specialist named Phil Remington created a metal bubble and riveted it to the roof to accommodate Gurney's head. It's since become known as the Gurney bubble. Many customers specifically requested for their car. With the bubble above and this seat underneath, the GT40 provides a comfy ride on any surface, whether it's a pitted old dirt road or a newly paved superhighway. To make sure their GT40s are as authentic as possible, Superformance custom builds nearly all the components of the car. The manufacturer that made the original gauges still produces them 50 years later. Based in the UK, the instrument gauge manufacturer still uses the original tooling to make their products. Back in the late 60s, all of the dashboard components were analog. Superformance ensures that the dashboard of their GT40s remain true to this old-school look. Here, a specialist quickly and carefully lays out the wiring on a setup called a harness board. While the board may look confusing and intimidating, the wiring scheme has simply been doubled back on itself a few times to save space. Otherwise, the board would have to be the length of an entire GT40. A back view of the dashboard reveals some of the same vintage wiring features that you would see if you took apart an original GT40. These include mechanical gauges that are inserted directly into the engine. Brass fittings on the ends of some of the wires sit directly in the engine fluid compartments. Back in the fabrication area, a technician prepares to manufacture one of the GT40's rear control arms by hand. He clamps all of the parts into a jig that is custom made for this part. Once everything is in place, he TIG welds it all together. Every element of this component is exactly the same as the original, right down to the dimension and thickness of the steel tubes. The control arm is a hinged suspension link between the chassis and the hub assembly. Unlike a wishbone, it has only one connecting point to the chassis. This means the suspension system needs a separate link or radius rod to help control the movement of the wheel. The suspension for the Superformance GT40 follows the layout of the original precisely. The rear suspension is fully independent and includes trailing arms, unequal length lateral arms, coil springs, tube shocks, and an anti-roll bar. The front suspension features unequal length A-arms with coilover shock and spring technology. Here, specialists create the GT40's two fuel tanks by welding together pre-bent sections of stainless steel sheets. This is an element in the Superformance GT40 that differs from the original. Instead of stainless steel, the fuel tanks in the 1960s Ford GT40s were flexible bladders made of rubber. These tanks are still available, but they're extremely expensive. Using stainless steel, Superformance is able to build their own tanks. Stainless steel is less expensive, safer, more durable, and can be built and tested in-house. Technicians now test out the finished tanks by filling them with air, sealing their openings, and immersing them in a vat of water. With no sign of rising bubbles, this tank is leak-free. It may be one of the most iconic race cars ever made, but even icons have to be assembled. It's time for those handmade components to come together and form a fully operational GT40. Technicians insert the stainless steel fuel tanks into their compartments. The compartments run like holsters on either side of the car. With the original car, the two tanks were linked by a big tube, which ran through the cockpit directly under the driver's legs. It was an astounding safety hazard, and is completely unthinkable in a contemporary car. Back in the late 1960s, race car driver safety was a low priority. These days, it's the top priority. Superformance has rerouted the link between the two tanks. Now they're joined in the engine compartment. Workers attach the first of the exterior body panels. The vehicle is beginning to take on the legendary form of the GT40. A technician installs the aluminum expansion tank. Superformance boasts that over 70% of the parts in their GT40s are interchangeable with the original. Custom built in-house, the expansion tank is one of those many parts. Next, the battery tray goes in. The battery sits here because there's no room for it anywhere else. The technician then installs an oil cooler on top of the battery tray. Now it's time for the workers to attach the rear subassembly to the monocoque chassis. A set of hinge points allow the entire subassembly to raise up. This design feature gives mechanics fast and easy access during races, when every second counts. A technician carefully bolts the rear lower control arm into place. The car's suspension is critical in a car like this, especially with a chassis that is one of the stiffest on the market. But of course, when it comes to high-speed race cars, the stiffer the chassis, the better. With the open C-shaped hinge system in place, workers can now bring the rear section of the car down into position. A technician uses a riveting tool to attach the intake for a brake cooling duct. This will direct air from the front of the car over the brake discs for improved efficiency. The vented disc 4-position caliper brakes come from Willwood, a leading manufacturer of brake components. They make brake parts for everything from go-karts to Humvees. Now, workers add aluminum closure panels to increase the strength and aerodynamic efficiency of the car. The Superformance factory in South Africa ships out GT40s with everything but the engine and transmission. Customers can choose what powertrain to add when the car arrives. The original GT40 had a dry sump oil tank, which is no longer necessary. Superformance has cleverly concealed the car's air conditioning system inside a replica of that tank. Once the powertrain has been installed, technicians put the vehicle through a rigorous dyno test. This makes sure the car meets all the stringent parameters of the original GT40 design. The Superformance GT40 actually outperforms its predecessor. While the engines they install are modern versions of the ones from the 1960s, they're much more powerful. Superformance recommends a specially prepared Ford racing engine or Shelby engine, built with a new ZF RBT style 5-speed transaxle. However, customers can choose any Ford-based 289, 302, or 351W small block or 427 big block engine. Henry Ford II finally got his revenge on Enzo Ferrari with the amazing GT40, putting an end to the legendary Italian carmaker's 6-year winning streak at Le Mans. Ford was actually in attendance when the GT40 powered to victory at Le Mans in 1966, becoming the first car from an American manufacturer to ever win that race. The Speed Machine dominated the world of long-distance car racing for years. No wonder so many car aficionados dream of owning this icon of racing history. Thanks to Superformance, that dream can be fulfilled.